Okay, I think this is a little better, but it's not too much better. All right. Okay. Hopefully, this is working better. I reduced the latency. I've done, I think, what I can on my end. If it's still bad, it's just my internet connection is the problem. The upload speed is not good enough. All right. So let me know in chat if this is okay, this is tenable or not, or if it's just really struggling. I'm definitely seeing no issues for you. Okay. Um, oh, it is. Yeah. Um, well, we'll push through and hope that it figures itself out. All right. So let me go over this concept once again. So we're going to start with a revision of the stuff we covered in lesson 3, because between the technical difficulties and then also just it being a complex lesson, I think it was difficult for most of you to follow. So we'll go over it one more time. And then using that as a building block, we'll look at how using this model can help us analyze the structure of a Japanese sentence better. Okay, so fundamentally, every sentence in Japanese is either A does B and B is a verb, or A is B and B is either a noun or an adjective. So A is the subject, and B, if it is an A does B sentence, is the verb. So watashi ga iku, right? So we know watashi is me and iku is go. So watashi ga iku is I will go. If it's an A is B sentence, then A is the subject and B is either a noun or an adjective. It's some kind of description of the subject, right? Either saying that this person is this kind of a noun or this person is like this. Either way, you're describing the subject. So when you have a sentence like that, you say E ga bi da, right? And this da is the same as this as well. Okay? So every Japanese sentence fundamentally boils down to either A is B, in which case A ga B da, or A does B, in which case A ga B. So an example of an A does B sentence, Rushia ga Nihonjin da. So Rushia is a person, Nihonjin is Japanese person, and so Rushia ga Nihonjin da is Rushia is a Japanese person. E adjectives are a special case of being a description that does not require da at the end of the sentence. So if you have an A is B sentence and B happens to be an E adjective, right? A true adjective. In that case, you don't need da at the end. So kuruma ga akai. You don't have to say kuruma ga akai da. Just kuruma ga akai is good enough. Not every Japanese sentence is going to explicitly state the subject. It can be understood from context. So if you had an English example of this, would be saying A does B, then C, or A is B and also C, right? So this then A does C or and also A is C It's there implicitly. We're not stating it every time because we just said it, so we don't have to say it again. So it's the same phenomenon. You don't have to repeat yourself endlessly. You can leave things out from the purest grammatical forms for convenience. So when this kind of thing happens, we're going to use this notation of the zero pronoun, right? And so we're going to say that the subject in this case, if it is A ga B, and we say that the subject is left out, then we can say it is zero ga B or zero ga B da as needed. So if we're talking about John Cena, right, you can just say John Cena da. You don't need to say kare ga John Cena da. It's just John Cena da. If you want to think how this works structurally in your head, it is zero ga John Cena da. Okay? But because it is zero ga, that cancels it out. We don't have to say that part. O is the object marker of a sentence. It tells you what the verb acts on. So if A is the subject, B is the verb, we're going to call C the object. This is the thing that gets marked with O. So, watashi ga niku o taberu. Watashi is I, taberu is eat, niku is meat. Niku o taberu is eat meat. You can use the zero pronoun so that instead of having to say watashi ga niku o taberu, you can just say niku o taberu. Ni is the target of an action. So some verbs don't act on objects, but they can have a target. For example, if you're going to throw a ball, who are you throwing the ball to? That's your target. So the way you would use the target, we'll call it D, is A ga D ni, and then your B. So, watashi ga nihon ni iku. So, iku is to go, and so where you're going is the target of the action iku, and that would be nihon ni, right? So you mark it with this ni. And as before, your pronoun, you can use the zero pronoun so that instead of saying watashi ga, you can just say nihon ni iku, and that means I'm going to Japan. So you put all of this together, and your sentence, right, fundamentally, A ga B, watashi ga nageru, I throw, and then you add information to it with these other marked parts. So, watashi ga boru o, this is O marked, so it means that the action is done to this thing. This is ball. So, the action throw is done to the ball. O anata ni, this is the target, which means the action throw is done towards the target, which in this case is anata, so you, right? Watashi ga boru o anata ni nageru. I throw the ball to you. Order is not important within the particles as long as, right, you end your sentence with B. And later we'll see that it doesn't even have to be that. But for now, as long as you end your sentence with B, you can have A ga, you can have C ni, you can or C O and D ni in whatever orders you want. So these two sentences mean the same. Whether you say watashi ga boru o anata ni nageru or anata ni watashi ga boru o nageru. Whichever way you say those, right? And you can even say boru o watashi ga anata ni nageru if you wanted. All of these are interchangeable and they mean the same thing. Basically, when you put this particle next to something, it gets placed in a box, and this is your subject box. Boru o, this becomes your object box, and anata ni becomes your target box, and then finally, nageru is, in this case, because it's a verb, that's your action box. And so these boxes can be rearranged however you like, as long as all of the boxes are present in the sentence, then it is structurally sound. And as before, I mentioned this watashi ga, if you used the zero pronoun, then you don't have to explicitly state it, but it is there, right? All sentences are ultimately A ga B, even if you can't see A in the sentence. So having talked about ga, and we know that ga contrasts to wa, let's talk about how we actually use wa. So wa is a topic marker, not a subject marker. Wa is not part of the structural logic of the sentence. So when you say A ga B, right? This is structural. This is the grammar of the sentence. Whatever is topic marked does not actually matter. It's kind of like a flag that's just attached to this, but it doesn't have to physically be there. And so if you were to remove it from the sentence should still make sense. So the way you would do that, right? If you say E is your topic, Iwa is saying, speaking of E, or, as for E, and then whatever it is you're actually saying, which is your A ga B sentence. So if we said kyo wa, which is speaking of today, kyo wa watashi ga boru o anata ni nageru. Ashita wa anata ga boru o watashi ni nageru. So kyo wa, this is a flag. Speaking of today, watashi ga, this is the subject. Boru o anata ni nageru. You can see how this works. And then the next one is ashita wa, speaking of tomorrow. Anata ga, this is the new subject, and I've color-coded them, right? Boru o, this is the object. Watashi ni, this is the target. Nageru. So both sentences are ultimately I wa E ga C o D ni B. Okay? And by changing which words are marked by which particles, you change the meaning of the sentence. But the particles have the same function in every sentence. Now, when you use the topic marker wa, you can remove information that is understood to be there, like the zero pronoun. So when you say, kyo wa anata ni nageru, ashita wa watashi ni nageru, right? And you leave out this stuff, you're just highlighting the information that is most important to you. So it's like, for today, throw to you. For tomorrow, throw to me. And it's understood who then has to throw the ball, and that you're going to throw a ball. When you say throw, from context, it would be understood, well, you have a ball in your hand, so you're talking about the ball, and it's just the two of us here, so it's obvious to me that if you say throw to me, you're saying I need to throw to you. And if I say throw to you, that you're going to throw to me. So this is how Japanese sentences are constructed. One of the, I guess it's kind of a meme, but one of the things is, if you were to listen to a Japanese conversation and you got there late, it will be hard for you to figure out what they're talking about because they drop a lot of information that they had previously established. But if you got there at the beginning, then it should be fine because you have all the relevant information. Okay. So yeah, this is what I was saying, is that if you had the same sentence, anata ni nageru, right? Zero ga boru o anata ni nageru. So the base sentence is zero ga nageru, zero will throw, whoever zero is, right? And you say, watashi wa, as for me, zero ga nageru. And so when you say that, it kind of makes it the same thing. And so it's like, I will throw to you. If you say, boru wa anata ni nageru, now you change the stress. Rather than saying, I will throw the ball, you're saying, the ball I will throw to you. So you change who you're really focusing on. So here you can see that emphasis, right? Watashi wa anata ni nageru versus boru wa anata ni nageru. They both mean throw the ball to you, but the stress in the first one, when you say watashi wa, is I will throw the ball to you. And if you say boru wa, then it's I will throw the ball to you. So whatever you mark with wa is your topic. That's basically the most important part of this sentence. Or, well, not the sentence. You establish this is what we're talking about. And so if you say, I throw the ball to you, it's then understood that, okay, we're talking about the ball. We're not talking about me or you. We're focused on the ball. Okay, I think I'd mentioned time expressions. We can skip this for now because we talked about this before. Let's talk about adjectives. Okay, so there are 4 ways to make adjectives, and it's going to depend on what the base thought is. So if the base thought is pen ga akai, right? The pen is red. Then the way you can use that as an adjective, just take this adjective as is with no modifications and put it before the noun, akai pen. Okay? If you had a verb, shoujo ga utatta. Shoujo is a young woman and utau is to sing. This is past tense, utatta. The way to make an adjective out of a verb is you take the verb with no modification and you put it before the noun. So you get utatta shoujo. If you have a noun, right, then the noun is going to be hana ga kirei da. So kirei is an adjective, so it's a noun. So it's a nominalized adjective. Then this da has to be present. So you take kirei da and you move it in front of hana. But you make a change, and instead of saying kirei da hana, you use what's called the connective form of da. So it changes to na, and it becomes kirei na hana. And the way I would think of this structurally is pretty is flower. Okay? So you have red pen, sing was girl, pretty is flower. Okay? And then the last way to make an adjective is to say that something belongs to a class of nouns. So kuruma ga pink da, right? So you take this pink da, this pink is a noun again, and you move it in front of the noun. Pinku no kuruma. So now when you say no, it changes a little bit from na. Rather than saying pink is car, you're saying car that belongs to pink. And we'll talk about how this no works in the future with some more detail. Okay, negation. We've seen how to negate verbs, but let's talk about negation as a general concept because there are patterns across all of it. So negation is done with nai, and it's kind of like English not. So if you say pen ga aru, the negative form of that, pen ga nai. All right. If you had da in your sentence, kore wa pen da, then you have to change this da to dewa. So kore wa pen de wa nai. Okay, and what dewa is doing, it changes da into connective form and adds wa to it. So it takes this idea, kore wa pen da, and says, as for kore wa pen da, nai. Okay, that's how this is working. So you change the da to de, which is connective form, and then you add wa to say, okay, speaking of the topic, kore wa pen da, nai, it's not. Okay, and the way you would say that in English naturally is, as for this, a pen, it is not. Okay, so pen da is changing to pen de, which is the de form, connective form. Then pen de wa, as for kore wa pen da, and then nai. Dewa is often shortened to ja. This is a contraction, and we'll talk about contractions later. So instead of saying kore wa pen de wa nai, you will very often hear kore wa pen ja nai. Okay? We will see ja to mean dewa in a bunch of contexts, which is why it's important to note that this is a contraction. And also, this model is useful to us because if we think of nai as just meaning not, then our model of the language will be simpler when we look at negating verbs, negating other kinds of adjectives, and so on. So rather than learn janai as one concept, ja nai, pen de wa nai. As for a pen, it is not. All right. I think we talked about verbs. Verbs by default will be present in their u form, right? This is the base form of verbs. And then depending on how you conjugate the verb, you take a verb stem, which is going to end in a sound. In the base form, they end in the u sound. But depending on the verb form that you're trying to get to, you will change it to a different stem, and then you add an ending. And then we went over some of these endings. I'm not going to focus on them because we will go over them again. But the one you're familiar with is mas, right? The polite form. So what are we doing? We change it to the e stem of the verb and add mas. So this is if it is a regular verb. If it's an irregular verb, I'm still going to say we change it to the e stem, but all stems for irregular verbs are the same. You just drop the ru. So the e stem of taberu is tabe, and then you add mas, tabemas. If it was a regular verb, let's say kau changed to kai, and then mas, kaimas. All right. So you're already familiar with this way to conjugate verbs, and I'm just expanding on that and saying that there are multiple verb endings, and we're going to learn these as verb endings. So you make your verb stem, add your verb ending, and that's how you conjugate a verb. Right? So omou becomes omoimasu, and then I have an example sentence. Similarly, there's a form, which we saw before, is used with the negative. So in the plain form, when we talked about it yesterday, to negate something, we change it to the a stem and add nai, right? And specifically, there's an exception here where u, instead of changing to a, will change to wa, but that's the only exception. Everything else is the same. So, for example, shinu, which is to die, will change to shina, and then you add nai, shina nai, not die. And again, irregular verbs, they have the same stem for all sounds. So the a stem of taberu is also tabe, and you add nai, tabe nai. All right. And it's the same concept. The a form is going to be shift these over to a. This makes imperative form. You can have o for volitional, and we'll talk about all these different forms. Okay. So if that's all clear, I'm going to set up the next set of information. If you have any questions about this, ask me in chat. All right, I don't see any questions yet, but there is a bit of lag. So if I do see one, I will ask, I'll stop and talk about it. Okay, so here is a concept I want you to hold throughout your Japanese learning. Okay. Yeah, I'll cover the a part again when we talk about it. All right, but you already know it. We learned it in the casual Japanese, and the way to make an a, right, is basically if you had ta be ru, drop the ru, add nai, right? So tabenai. And if it was, so that's iru verbs. If it's a regular verb, so let's say shinu, right? Shi, nu. Change the nu to na, right? Shi, na. And then add nai. Shi, na, nai. So it's already what you knew. And that's just an example of it. But there are other forms you can make with the a stem as well. We'll talk about how you use stems. I think we'll use one today, and that should make things clearer. Okay? So I want you to have this concept with you throughout your Japanese learning. When you translate Japanese to English, we want to use the most natural sounding English that we can. You think about it. If we were to translate some anime and we wanted English subs for that, we're not going to make the most literal translation possible because that makes it awkward to read. And that's especially hard if, the dialogue is fast. You want to convey all the information that's being said, but you want to do it as naturally as possible so that whoever's watching the show can understand it as quickly as possible, right? And then especially if you imagine someone who knows zero Japanese is going to be very confused if the subs seem too Japanesey. So you translate them to be as natural sounding in English as possible so that they don't need to know Japanese to understand why the subs are the way they are. That said, when we learn Japanese, we don't want to connect it to natural English, right? So I'm going to, in many cases, translate what I've written in Japanese into English because that's the language we're using to learn Japanese. But that doesn't mean that you should internalize a literal translation, a natural translation as how the Japanese works. The Japanese concept is, Japanese as a language is separate entirely from English. Its structure is different. It was originated differently. So I want you to have a language model of Japanese and not necessarily tie that back to how English works, but just think this is how Japanese works. As long as you can do that, then when I introduce new concepts to you in Japanese, I think it will be faster for you to add them to your toolkit and be able to use them more naturally. So one example of that is this adjective suki. Okay? So we learn in the beginning that watashi wa hororaibu ga suki da means I like hololive. And we know watashi is I, we know hororaibu is hololive, and we know suki is like. Because when they translate the sentence, they say I like hololive. And we know this word, and we know this word, and we know the rest of it is grammar. So suki must mean like. But that's not what's happening, right? If you look at where the ga is in this sentence, ga is marking hororaibu. So it's not I like hololive. Hololive is the subject. Watashi is not even part of the logical trio. It's wa marked, right? You can just say hororaibu ga suki, right? Hororaibu ga suki da is the full sentence. So the way I would translate this for a learning perspective is, as for me, hololive is a favorite. Or if I want to use an adjective specifically, rather than say suki as a noun, hololive is pleasing, right? That kind of thing. Similarly, when you say hon ga wakatta, right? We say hon is book, wakatta past tense for wakaru. So hon ga wakatta, we translate that as I understood the book, but it is hon ga wakatta, not watashi ga wakatta. So really, the book was understood. That's what is really being said, okay? And the reason I'm pointing this out, it's not that these translations are wrong. When someone says hon ga wakatta, you should understand that as I understood the book, right? But what they are saying, the way the language works, is the book was understood. Okay? That's important. And as we go deeper, that kind of a distinction between what you're saying in English versus what you're saying in Japanese will continue to exist. And so making sure you have the right structure of how the Japanese works will mean that concepts stay consistent in the Japanese language, and that makes it easier to understand rather than learning all kinds of exceptions and stuff, trying to force Japanese into English grammar concepts, which is not how it works. So, how do we express that you want something in Japanese? So we have two ways to do this. Okay, we have marumaru ga hoshii, and hoshii is an adjective. It's an e adjective specifically. Or we can say marumaru ga, your verb in e form, and this verb ending tai. This one is new. This one I think we've seen before. Koneko ga hoshii, right? So koneko is a kitten. Neko is cat, ko is child. Koneko is a kitten. Koneko ga hoshii. Because koneko is marked by ga, it's not I want a kitten, even though that's how you would translate the sentence in English. You're saying a kitten is, and what are you saying about it? Hoshii. And that is desirable. So it's not so much I want a kitten. Hoshii doesn't mean the verb want. Hoshii is an adjective. That means it makes me want it. So it's desirable. So the tai ending on a verb works similarly. Boku wa, as for me, keiki o, this is just cake in katakana, keiki o tabetai. I want to eat cake is how you translate it, but remember, it's boku wa, so it's not I want to eat cake, right? So it's keiki o tabetai. So cake is the object of the sentence, and it is tabetai. So tabe is eat, and then tai is want, and so I'm going to call this eat want. Okay? As for me, cake is eat want. So this is weird, right? If you think about saying, as for me, cake is eat want, that just does not make sense in English, and you would never write this as a sub for a dialogue in an anime, for example. But this is how the sentence is working under the hood. And so while with simple sentences, this is going to seem crazy. Why are you writing it like that? Why can't you just write it normally? As we build more and more complicated sentences, having this kind of structure is going to be useful, because then we can see how individual parts of the sentence are contributing to the overall sentence, right? Think of these as like Lego blocks. And so if we learn these as Lego blocks, then when we put the full build together to make a sentence, you can see why each Lego block is where it is. If you learn them as English concepts, then it's going to be weird, because you haven't seen the Lego blocks. You're just kind of seeing bits and pieces, and it's like, well, I don't understand, how did like this pillar contribute to the whole build? Like, how does it join and stuff? It's weird. It doesn't really make sense. But if we see it from the individual block level, we can understand the full picture. And so I want you to have an understanding of the Lego blocks rather than from the English translation, so that in the future, if you come across a new Japanese sentence that you don't know what it means, you can look at the individual Lego blocks and piece together how the sentence works. So let's try it. Let's take this big sentence, right? And it has a lot of kanji, and most of this kanji you haven't seen before. And I haven't given you any furigana, which is like the hiragana that you would write on top of kanji to make it easy to read. I haven't given you any of that, right? So how are you going to understand this sentence? Well, first, let's look at what we do know. So this is boku ga. It's the ga marked subject, okay? So we know this is the subject, and the subject is I. Something, ni. Itte, this is iku, which is to go, and it's in te form, which means that you do and, okay? So I went to whatever this is, and something something they. We know they tells you, when you do a verb, where it happened. So at whatever this is, this o mita. This is miru, which is to see. It's in past tense. So I saw whatever this thing is. And then something datta. Datta is past tense of ta. So it was whatever this means. So we don't need to know the kanji to understand what the sentence kind of means. I went to this place. At this place, I saw this thing. It was this. Now we just have to copy paste these kanji into like a dictionary to understand what the sentence means. But we already understand the structure of the sentence. We know what it's trying to say. And so when we just fill in the blanks, right, if we know what these words are, it's easy for us to then know what the sentence means. We don't have to learn any extra grammar rules because these are just nouns. So here are the words, right? This is France, which is France. This is dobutsu-en, which means the zoo. This is kabutomushi, which is a rhinoceros beetle. And this is saiko, which is the best. So, if we put all that together, boku ga France ni itte kaibutsu-en de kabutomushi o mita. Saiko datta. Right? I went to France, and at the zoo, I saw a rhinoceros beetle. It was the best. Right? So we knew the grammar already, and we just had to fill in the blanks with the nouns. This is the intention of the language model I'm going to teach you. All you'll have to do then is learn vocabulary, and you'll have the grammatical structure to understand the entire thing. So you'll be in a good place when you see brand new sentences to understand what they mean. And that's also going to help you with learning vocabulary, right? So if, for example, in this entire sentence, let's say that this is the only word that you did not know and you knew the rest. So you would say, well, I went to France and at the zoo, I saw this. You know what the rest of the sentence means? So when you Google this and your dictionary tells you, okay, this means rhinoceros beetle, you say, oh, okay, that makes sense. And you have the rest of the sentence as a base for you to then know how to use rhinoceros beetle in a sentence. And then this becomes +1, a word that you can add to your your vocabulary. You know it now because you've seen it in context. And so as you encounter a different sentence that uses it, you know what it means. So it'll be easier for you to learn new words and so on. So you just build your vocabulary slowly by doing this. Okay. Really quickly, I'm going to talk about e-adjectives and how they work structurally. Because the e contains da within it, kowai, which means scary, right? You can say inu ga kowai is dogs scary are, right? Because the da is in there. But I'm not going to do that because to me, are is a verb. And so I'm just going to say dogs scary. Okay. So if we say watashi wa kowai, for example, the verb changes. It becomes am. But there is no verb in the sentence. That's why I'm not going to use da. It's a copula. It's not a verb. But also it's important to know that if you were to look at this structure and try to think of this as a verb, you have to pick the right verb for the topic. All right. So rather than saying watashi wa kowai, because watashi wa is not part of the logical trio, you can drop it and you can just say kowai. And kowai is scary, but it's understood from context. You're saying, I feel afraid. Okay. So, in a similar way, you might just hear a sentence like someone sees some piece of food and they just say, tabetai. What does that mean? So, we know it's zero pronoun because, it's got to be A, ga, B. And we don't see A, so we know this is zero ga B. And B is tabetai. Zero ga tabetai. But what is zero, right? We saw keiki o tabetai is cake is a cake eat want, right? But what is zero? Zero is me. By default, if you see zero and you don't have any reason to believe it could be anything else, assume zero is a first person pronoun. So, watashi ga tabetai. Okay? Here's an additional fact. In Japanese, you don't make assumptions about other people's feelings. You only state stuff that you know for a fact about other people. So if a sentence says hoshi or tabetai, you know that this is a personal opinion. You might be speaking on behalf of someone, but it's a personal opinion. You're not guessing what someone else is feeling. So you can't say kanojo ga inu o hoshii, right? Or tabetai, keiki o tabetai. You can't say it on behalf of someone else unless they have told you that. You're not allowed to guess how people feel. This is just an integral part of how Japanese as a language is used. When we talked about omou, right? We can say watashi wa marumaru to omoimasu. I think this. That's fine. But when you're talking about someone else's thoughts, you don't know if it hasn't changed. You don't know their current state of mind. So when you relay someone else's thoughts, marumaru to omoimashita, at the time, this is what they were thinking. Similarly, if you want to express someone wants something, you can't say kare wa marumaru ga hoshii or kanojo wa marumaru tabetai, for example. We don't know their current feelings. So the way we would do that, we can use this helper verb called garu. And garu is kind of like seems like or showing signs of doing this. Sakura ga keiki o hoshigaru, right? Or, Sakura cake want acts. So want, hoshi, is an adjective. Garu is a helper verb that means acts in this case. So Sakura cake want acts, which in natural English, Sakura is acting like she wants cake. Garu doesn't work with verbs, only with adjectives. So if you wanted to say tabetai in this kind of suggestive way, then you can use the conjunctive form of ta, right, as desho or daro. So tabetai desho is just des in what's called conjecture, and it's like guessing. You want to, right? Probably. It looks like you want to, so I'm guessing, but you're not saying, oh, you want to eat this. You're saying, I'm guessing you want to. Or if you're in polite form, you can just ask it as a question, right? Tabetai desu ne, right? Or tabetai desu ka. Desu ne, this is like seeking confirmation. So it's like, hey, you want to eat it, right? It's a hypothetical, rhetorical question. So you're seeking kind of a response, but you know what the response is going to be because you can see it on their face. But you're not allowed to just say that they want to eat it. You have to ask either allegorically or directly with tabetai desu ne or tabetai desu ka. And then garu, I will just mention quickly, is also used in narratives in different ways. So we will probably go over this again. So you don't have to really know garu too much. But the important point, not so much how garu works. It is useful to know the desho or asking as desne or deska as to why people would use these forms and not just say things in, on behalf of other people. That is the key point here. So since we mentioned helper verbs, let's look at a few of them, right? So nai is not, it's a helper adjective. Thai is another helper adjective. It means want. So, tabe is your stem plus nai is eat not. And tabe tai is eat want. So you can see what the verb is, and you can see what the helper word is doing and how it is affecting what we're trying to say. And I really like this hyphenated structure. So I'm going to use this hyphenated modifier structure, kind of like, seeing how the Lego blocks interact with each other. Because when we do more complicated sentences, it keeps the parts of the sentence very clear to us. So since we have this helper system, let's learn a helper verb, which is rareru. Rareru is used to make potential form. Okay? There's two ways that rareru can attach to a verb, and it depends on what kind of verb it is. So if it's a regular verb, then you put it in its a stem, and then you add ru. If it's a irueru verb, drop the ru, right? So you put it in its a stem by dropping the ru, and then you add rareru. So yomu, mu into a stem, so yome, add ru, yomeru. And this means read can or read able. I'm going to use can in most situations rather than able because it's saying that it can be done. So yomeru is can read, which I'm going to write as read can. Taberu becomes tabe rareru. And it's the same thing. It means eat can. So if you say hon ga yomeru, hon was book, right? Hon ga yomeru, the book is readable, or, book is read can. You can read the book. If you say watashi wa yomeru, as for me, readable. I can read the book. Rareru is an irueru verb. So if you want to modify this, conjugate this, you drop the ru and add your verb endings. So yomeru is current tense, right? Yometa, drop the ru, add ta, that's your past tense. Yomenai is not. And yome nakatta, right? We saw nakatta is past negative. So couldn't. So read can, not was. You see how this works? Yome nai, and then nai becomes nakatta. So read can, not was. And that tells you all the modifiers and how they're linking together to form the full thing. Can I, as in when you're asking if you can. It depends. If you're talking about asking for permission, no, you wouldn't use rareru. Because technically speaking, even in English, right? This is a pedantic English teacher will say this. You should not be asking for permission with can, even though everyone does it. Can in English is just about the ability for someone to do something. So if you say, can I go to the bathroom? You think you're asking for permission. The actual structure of English says, you're saying, do I have the ability to go to the bathroom? And so a pedantic English teacher would say, may I, which is the way to ask for permission. So in Japanese, that concept persists. This is can, right? Able. And so it's not, am I able to go to the bathroom? But rather, you would want to ask, will I be allowed to? And that's a different construction. Okay, so we'll look at that one also fairly soon, but not today. Here's an example of rareru attaching to an irueru verb rather than a regular verb. So tabe rareru, tabe rare ta, because you just drop the ru of rareru and make the change. Tabe rare nai and tabe rare nakatta. All right. Here are two verbs that are very, very common as helper verbs, and they are kureru and ageru. Kureru is to give downwards, and ageru is to give upwards. So we've mentioned in the past that Japanese is very hierarchical society. We have a, what's that? Antawa toberu is can you fly? Or can you jump? Yeah. So if you ask it like that, right? Can you jump? That is a valid question. I guess the only thing is because it's a question, I would use anta ga, but that's like a nuance thing. I'll talk about the wa versus ga again. The other thing I would mention is, again, anata does not need to use kanji. So, yes. So it does work as, are you capable of X? Yes, correct. It is literally asking about, do you have the potential? That's why I'm calling it the potential form. Is it possible? Does the potential exist for this action to take place? That's when you would use rareru as a helper verb. So taberareru means, is it edible? Can it be eaten? Right? Toberu, which you've written, is can it jump or can it fly? And so on. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so back to this. Kureru and ageru. So Japanese is a very hierarchical society. And so respect is imbued into the hierarchy. And so when you want to ask people to do things for you, or when you do things for them, you need to kind of use this hierarchy. So the way it works is that this is you, and this is the person you're talking to. And always they are above you. So if they give you something because you're below them, they have to give it downwards. And if you give them something because they're above you, you have to give it upwards. And so kureru and ageru are give downwards and give upwards. Kureru is to lower and ageru is to raise, more literally. But in this case, I'm going to say give because you'll see in a second. But the important part is that you are below the person you're talking to. So you have to use the right verb depending on whether you're the one who is getting it or the one who is giving it. So for example, we saw marumaru o kudasai, right? When we said if you wanted to order something in a restaurant, for example. Kudasai, if you look at the kanji, this is kudasai, and this kuda is shita, which is down. You might not remember this, but we did have this in the directional prepositions. This is the kanji for down. Kudasai is like a special form of kudasaru, which is a humble form of kureru. So the important part, not to know all of this, but rather just that kureru and kudasaru are basically the same verb, and they both mean give down. So when you already were saying maru maru o kudasai, you're implicitly saying, can you give this down to me? So not only can you give things, but you can also give actions. And this is how you would use kureru and ageru as helper verbs. Nihongo de hanashite kure. Nihongo, Japanese language, de, with the Japanese language. Hanashite, speak, and kure. And this is give down. All right? And this is in e, which is imperative form. So it's really asking them to do something. So, Japanese with speak, give, request. So hanasu becomes hanashite in te form, right? We talked about how su becomes shita or shite in the ta and the te form. So hanashite kure. So it's kureru in imperative form, which we will talk about, and that's kure. And so Nihongo de hanashite kure is please speak in Japanese for me. In English, you don't say the for me part, right? Please is already making it a request. And so you just say, please speak in Japanese. The kure part, the kureru, is an additional thing that you need in the Japanese, but is not needed in English. And that's because of this hierarchical structure. Okay? So when you want someone to do something for you, verb kure. And then I don't have an example here, I guess. But if you say, I'm going to do this for you, verb ageru, right? I will do this and give it up. We'll see more examples of this as we keep going. Okay, here are a couple of nouns that are very important. So, mono and koto. So, mono is a generic noun that means thing. Koto is also a generic noun that means thing. The difference is mono is for concretely defined things. So, a box, a doll, something like that. But koto is for abstract things. So, heat, dampness, those kind of abstract concepts. We saw this in the past, that you can add mono to the e stem of a verb and you can make it verb thing. So if you say kaimono, kau was to buy. So kaimono is buy thing. So this becomes stuff that you buy. Tabemono was eat thing. So this becomes food. These are still clearly defined concepts, right? Even though they are abstract in that, shopping or food are kind of generic, they're not as abstract as, things that have no well-defined form, right? So food, you can picture food as like a physical object, but it is hard to do the same for, say, honesty, which is an abstract concept. You can't picture a physical manifestation of honesty as easily as you can a physical manifestation of food. So that's the difference with mono and koto, right? So if you used koto, koto is this stand-in for an abstract concept. It's a generic noun that doesn't have a physical form. So, hitori de, the kanji is one person. So, hitori is one person. De, and that makes it as one person. So, alone, iku, go alone. Koto wa nai. So, a thing of hitori de iku. The thing of go alone, as for that, no. So, if you look, one person go, as for such a thing, not. In English, I would just say, I never go by myself. Hello. You're a little late, but that's fine. Hopefully you can keep up. So, koto, in this case, is used to encapsulate this idea, hitori de iku. It encapsulates it as this abstract thing and says, as for this idea of hitori de iku, and what does it say about that? It just says, nai. There's no such thing. Okay, so I'm going to talk about now the te form. I showed you this a bit ago, but I didn't talk about it. Let's talk about it. The te form is used to connect multiple verbs together. So if I say itte miru, iku is to go, and miru is to see. Itte miru becomes go and see. Okay? So there are times when you want to do this, and you're going to say itte miru, which is go and see. But there are some times when you just want to create a combined verb that has the meaning of two verbs attached together. We do this in English as well, right? If you say, for example, breakfast and lunch becomes brunch. We portmanteau words together to form new words. In English, we do this with nouns most frequently. In Japanese, you do this a lot with verbs. So the way you do that is you take a verb, you put it in E form, and then you add your second verb. So noru is to climb, but in this case, we're going to say board a bus or a train. And kaeru is to exchange. So noru plus kaeru, you put the first verb in E stem, so nori kaeru. And what does that mean? Climb a bus, right? Board a bus and exchange. It means to transfer. And so when you want to invent new verbs that are kind of like combined actions of other verbs, this is a very common way that Japanese does it. So this doesn't mean that we can just smash two verbs together in this way and say, aha, I've invented a new verb. It's more so that a lot of verbs in Japanese are really just two verbs in a trench coat. And so look for this E form, the E stem plus a second verb, and it'll make more sense. Similarly, you have miru, right? This is a irueru verb. So its E stem just becomes mi. And you have ageru, which was to give up. So mi ageru is to look up. All right? Mi ageru. So it's not so much that you can just combine two verbs, but if you see this kind of a construction where you see a verb plus another verb as one verb, then you can understand what the constituent parts are, if you know what they are, and from that, understand what the overall meaning might be. In terms of how you'd conjugate a verb like norikaeru, you just conjugate the second verb, and the first verb stays what it is. So in this case, kaeru, this is an irueru verb, so it would be norikaeta. Similarly, miageru, this ageru is an irueru verb, so it would be miageta. So let's take all this theoretical knowledge we have and apply it practically to an extract from a story. And the story here is Alice in Wonderland. Okay? Aruhi, Alice wa kawa no soba ni ita. Okay? Aru is to be. Hi is day. So, a day is. There is a day. We talked about using a verb as an adjective by putting it in front of the noun. So, if you say hi ga aru, there is a day, then aru hi would be a day that is. And that's their way of saying once upon a time. So, aru hi, Alice wa, speaking of Alice, kawa no soba ni ita. So ita, past tense of iru, which is to be for a living thing. Kawa is a river. Kawa no soba, soba is beside. We talked about directional prepositions. So kawa no soba ni is the target of this verb. So if the verb is to be, ni tells you where it was staying. So aruhi, Alice wa kawa no soba ni ita. Is day, Alice riverside was. But once upon a time, Alice was sitting beside the river. You'll notice this verb is ita, but we say sitting. This is because when we translate it to English, we choose, if we want, to insert context where, the Japanese language chooses not to express something a particular way. We choose the way to express it that makes the most sense in English. So you could say Alice was beside the river, but saying Alice was sitting beside the river is also fine. One-chan wa tsumaranai hon o yonde ite asonde kuranakatta. Okay? One-chan, elder sister. We learned that in the family stuff. One-chan wa, speaking of the older sister, tsumaranai. This is an adjective which means boring. Hon o yonde. Hon is book. Yomu is to read. This is in te form, so it's continuous. Yonde, read and. Ite makes that continuous. Yonde ite, reading and. Asonde kure nakatta. So asobu is to play. Asobu plus kureru is to give Alice the action of playing. Nakatta, she wasn't doing that. So big sister, boring book, reading is and play give, not was. That's a really weird way to look at it. But her older sister was reading a boring book and wouldn't play with Alice, right? Asonde kure nakatta, she didn't give Alice the action of asobu, which is to play. So she wouldn't play for Alice or with Alice in this case. This is in quotes now. notice this, right? Omoshiroi koto ga nai. So omoshiroi is an e adjective that means interesting. Koto, we just talked about, abstract things. So omoshiroi koto is interesting things. Ga nai, there is nothing interesting. To, your quotation particle. Arisu wa itta. So Alice said, omoshiroi koto wa nai. There is nothing interesting happening. Sono toki. Toki is time. Sono toki, that time. Shiroi usagi. Shiroi is white. Usagi is rabbit. Shiroi usagi ga tori sugita. So toru is to pass through and sugiru is to exceed. Tori sugiru is to pass across your path, right? So if you are walking in this way and someone just cuts across you like this, tori sugita. And it's in past tense. Just then, a white rabbit went past her. Futsu no usagi de wa nakute. This is connective form of nai. Okay. Chokki o kiteiru usagi datta. Futsu is normal or usual. Futsu no usagi. So we talked about making no adjectives. This is how you would do it. So a rabbit that belongs to this class of normal, a normal rabbit, dewa nai, well, it wasn't a normal rabbit, and nakute in te form, so nai becomes nakute. Chokki is a vest. Kiteiru, so this is to wear, and that's in continuous form. So kiteiru, wearing a vest. Usagi datta. So we're using chokki o kiteiru as a verb, right? It is wearing a vest, so a vest-wearing rabbit. Okay, you use that verb with a noun to turn this into an adjective. This way, an adjective to modify your noun rabbit. So, futsu no usagi de wa nakute chokki o kiteiru usagi datta. It was not an ordinary rabbit, but one that was wearing a vest. Usagi wa, as for the rabbit, kaichu doke o mite. Kaichu doke is pocket watch. So pocket watch o mite, it looked at the watch and osoi, which is late. To itte, so it said, I'm late. And hashiri dashita. So hashiru is to run, and dasu is for something to emerge. So hashiri dasu is to emerge into a run, so break into a run. So the rabbit looked at his pocket watch, said, I'm late, and began to run. Chotto matte kudasai to arisu wa yonda. So yobu is to shout out or to call out to someone, to yell. Past tense. So arisu wa yonda, so Alice yelled. And what did she yell? That's marked with to. Chotto matte kudasai. So you might know what that already means. Chotto is a little. Matsu is to wait. Kudasai basically means please. It's please do this for me, right? It's like kure. So chotto matte kudasai is please wait a bit. So please wait. That's what chotto matte is. Chotto is a little. Matte is imperative form of wait. So when someone says chotto matte, they're saying like, wait a second. So chotto matte kudasai to arisu wa yonda. Demo, but we talked about this as well. You have one sentence, you have a second sentence, you contrast them with demo. Demo, usagi wa, but the rabbit, byon byon to hashiri tsuzuketa. So hashiru is to run, tsuzuku is to continue. So hashiri tsuzuketa is it continued to run. How did it continue to run? Pyon pyon to, which is an onomatopoeia that means boing boing. But the rabbit continue to run like boing boing, which it's weird to say in English to use an onomatopoeia there. So I'm just going to say, well, it hopped along because it didn't continue to run. We have a description for it, so I changed the verb to hopped. Okay, and there you go. That is basically, you can say, the first page of Alice in Wonderland translated into Japanese. And you should, by now, have the entire structure of how these sentences work. So as long as you knew the vocabulary here, right? It's okay if you can't read these kanji because we haven't learned anything about kanji. But the point is, if you could look up the kanji using, a dictionary, something like Jisho, for example, because you know the structure of how sentences work, you can understand, with just a little extra work, how the entire story works. So we took a full passage, we learned some grammar, and we're now able to understand the whole page. All right? So I think that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them in chat. Hopefully that was useful for you. If there were concepts in there that were hard for you to understand, that's okay. Just you can ask me questions about them, or as we see some more ideas going forward, you might have older ideas reinforced, right? So even if you didn't understand it today, as we make more sentences, you'll see similar concepts, and that might make this concept click. So I'll wait a minute for questions in chat. In terms of what we'll do next, we're just going to continue with structured lessons going forward. So today is Tuesday, so we'll have a lesson tomorrow, and then we'll have another day after. After that, I'm traveling. So I think the day after tomorrow will be our last of the EU sessions for this year. But I'm hoping to cover at least enough, like I'm speedrunning this, but I'm hoping that I will have covered enough grammar and enough stuff in the beginning that you can follow along in future Japanese lessons if you're ever able to make it. Or you can now go and read things about Japanese grammar. I can point you to some resources as well that you can use to continue learning from this point with the knowledge that you have on your own. What was they used for as a marker? Okay, so they is with. It just means with, basically. And so when you say something they and a verb, it means with this. And that becomes weird because you wouldn't say with in English for every use that you would use they for in Japanese. There's some times when you would translate that as at instead. But that's one of those examples where it's the same concept in Japanese, but in English, they're different concepts. And so we have different translations for them. So if you say, for example, hanami de kitta, right? So that would be cut with, I think, hasami de kitta is cut with scissors. But if you say nihon de yonda, that is at Japan I read. Same de, and they modify the verb. The verb is saying, with this context, this happens. Hold on. I'll say that again because I think my internet dropped out. They is basically saying, with this context, the verb happened. And that context could be a noun that tells you how the action was performed. It could be a noun that tells you where the action was performed. But it's basically saying with this context. And it's from that context you can figure out whether the English word should be with or at or whatever. And also that they is different from the connective form they, which we will talk about as well. So not every they is the same. Okay, but this is specifically when you're saying noun, they, verb. That's what that they is doing. Okay. So I the thing is, as we look at more Japanese grammar concepts, there's some overlap. Like we talked about, to simultaneously is both the and particle in a list, but it is also the quotation particle with verbs. And that kind of thing continues to exist in Japanese, unfortunately, where there is a lot of overlap between particles. And also, there are clever ways to use the same particle beyond the basic usage that we've learned to make new types of sentences. But we're going to ideally cover as much of those as we can in the next 2 days. So you'll be at a good place to do self-study from there, whether that's through reading things, whether that's through watching things. The hope is you can learn Japanese on your own in addition to resources on the internet. Okay. So if you have any questions, you can, as always, you can message me, post them in chat. That's fine. Thank you so much for coming again. 2 more lessons after this for the EU sessions, so definitely make sure to come. Kite kurte.